All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Homer Mallory. Here. Al Nelson. Here. Dwayne Lee. Delane Abbott. Here. Aaron Johnson. Here. Brenda Orsini. Here. Mayor Mallory, we have a we are in session at 6 p.m. Okay. I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. I was not expecting this kind of turnout, so that's awesome. This is a process, it's a planning workshop for a planning grant that the city council started about 2 years ago, probably. We contracted with public management and they put this together, and then we've worked with Jacob and Martin. They've been putting together our maps and now analyzing our utility system. So I'm going to turn it over. This is Ken Kanye with public management, and he's going to ask for y'all's input here in a minute.
Thank you, Danny. It's good to see all you guys here. This is it's a comprehensive plan. We looked at many items: housing, population, land use. Derek will be talking about the street system, the water system, the wastewater system. But one of the big benefits of this planning grant is all the mapping that we've prepared for you guys. The GIS mapping. I mean, this is stuff that it's going to belong to the city. Anytime y'all got to share it with anybody, or if there's any changes that need to be made, we could do all of that. Utility lines, any of that stuff. But one of the first maps that we created was a base map, which is, I know it's hard to see, but go ahead and zoom in a little bit on that if you can, Dalton. This is going to show all the lot lines, the city limits, streets, and then there's a broader purple line out here. And this is the red line is your city limit line, the broader purple line is your extraterritorial jurisdiction. And that has, there's a couple of things that was designed for, and that the legislature put that in the late 80s, 90s. And what it is these are the areas where you can enforce subdivision regulations, and what that does, subdivision regulations, and if there's any annexation that the city might do. You're a general law city. It's very unlikely that a lot of annexation will take place. But if it does, it would need to occur in this area inside this ETJ and then adjacent to the city's city limits. There's certain things like if there's a development that occurs just outside the city limits, but in that ETJ, and the developer wants services, water sewer services, the city could request that developer come into the city limits, and that would be a voluntary annexation, which is really kind of the only annexation that you guys as general law city would be doing at this time. The legislature in the past several cycles has made it increasingly more difficult to do annexations. Even the larger cities with the larger ETJs and the home rule cities that are over 5,000, they're still struggling putting together annexation plans and that kind of process. But I'm just giving you that information in case that does occur. One of the things that cities this size do, how they actually do annexation, is by exchanging. Someone wants to come in and get water and sewer services, and the city requests that they annex in. Of course, that increases tax base, that kind of stuff. The other advantage of this, and the other reason this ETJ rule was put in, it's a half mile for you guys. You get up to 5,000 people and it goes out to a mile, and you get up bigger than that and it goes all the way out. Some cities, the bigger ones, Fort Worth, Dallas, all these guys have 5-mile ETJs. They can't encroach on an existing ETJ, so it doesn't matter if another larger city is out here somewhere and starts to move this way. The ETJ for the City of Strawn is already established, so they would not be encroaching into that ETJ. It's not like we can go out there and enforce codes and ordinances. The only thing we can enforce is the subdivision regulations. We've drafted a couple of pair of ordinances for you guys as part of this plan. One of them is subdivision regulation, the other is zoning. By adopting this plan, you're not adopting those ordinances. You still need to go through that adoption process. So if that occurs after all this, y'all just call me and I can walk you through that process. What we were contracted to do is provide you with an adoptable ordinance. Okay, so my recommendation is to update subdivision regulations first, because the reason these regulations were put into place is that what was happening is developers were coming in just outside small cities like this. They were putting in developments, residential developments, whatever it might be. They're putting in real narrow roads, small water lines, small sewer lines. They weren't doing anything about any drainage that could happen, any potential drainage problems that development may occur. and then become the city's problem at some later time. So what happens is if you have subdivision regulations, a developer may come in, and the first thing they would do is they'd have to come to the city and go by the city's subdivision regulations as opposed to a county regulations. Typically, county subdivision regulations are very simple, and it's just like the lots need to be this size and this needs to be this size, but they don't get in detail about how wide the streets need to be, what size the water lines need to be, if there's a drainage plan part of it. Usually the subdivision regulations like the ones we have will say they've got to have some kind of detention or retention, or at least study that if their development is going to cause drainage problems for the city, then they've got to find a way. They have to come up with a way to detain that water or retain it. So that's the big one. Those are the two big reasons for these extraterritorial jurisdiction, what we call ETJ. That's the reason those rules were put into place. So, like I said, just because in the next month or two we're going to accept this plan and send it to the department for approval, but by doing that, you're not approving those ordinances. You still need to go through a process. Zoning is more complicated. It involves, especially if you're putting in a brand new zoning ordinance, we would have to notify every individual that owns property in the city and move through that process, have several hearings, those kind of things. So what I'm warning you, what I'm telling you is after I've gone, don't just pick that up and go, let's send it to council and approve it. There's a whole process for doing that, okay? Same thing with subregs, but I can walk you guys through if y'all are ready to move on that, okay? Go ahead and get me to the structure map. Okay, so second thing we looked at was all the structures in the city. I know it's hard to see, but what we did is we went around and did a field survey of all the housing units. It's hard to see, but some of them are in green, red, and blue, and that kind of delineates the condition of those structures. The map will also show whether it's in a single-family home, it's a manufactured home, which used to be called mobile homes, whether it's a business, multifamily, which could mean duplex, it could mean apartment buildings, fourplexes, any of those kind of things fit into multifamily units. And then we've kind of did an analysis on what condition they're in, whether they're in good condition, deteriorated, or dilapidated. There's also, we kind of determined whether it was a vacant structure or if someone was occupying that structure. So these other little colors in here, purples and the yellows, those are dictated by the grant, stuff that we have to put in about different race categories and different housing, if it's affordable housing, those kind of things. So those are required. I know it kind of clouds the map, but that's something that's required by the grant. This money that you guys got this from, it comes from the Community Development Block Grant Program. This is just a different fund. Usually you use this fund or this agency for water and sewer projects. This in particular is a planning grant fund. That's what it was for. Okay, and so if you guys, I know I've got this book out for you, but we've shown you the number of housing units that are in the city. There's a table at the beginning of the housing chapter that delineates this. And I will direct you to that here in just a second. So the reason we did the inventory helps us draw an analysis and what kind of things can be done. Table on page 19, table 2.1 will show you the inventory. That inventory is actually based on the results of this survey. There's also data in this chapter that's required census data. And one thing that we noticed when that census was taken, 2020, there was a lot of cities, and I'm sorry, this one here, yes, that's the one I'm looking at. So that table there just is an illustration of the housing survey that we did. I was talking about the census data. There's some other charts in this chapter that was census data that's required by the grant itself. One thing we were noticing is some of this data, the 2020 census data, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. Danny may have seen some of it, but we don't know exactly how accurate, because this census was taken in 2020 during the pandemic.
Yeah, it seems like we're severely undercounted.
Yes, and that's kind of where I'll go when I get into the population. And you can see on page 20 here, I start with the some of these tables that follow show you owner-occupied, renter-occupied. These tables are based on this 2020 census data, okay? When I get into what we actually, how many houses we counted, I'll get into, I can kind of show you that the discrepancy Danny was referring to. That on page 21, there's a couple of charts there. One of them is occupied and vacant. Once again, that's based on census data, which is not aligning with the count that we actually did. And then it shows the age of the housing units. And one of the main focuses on this is the age of the housing unit is just showing, it's an illustration of, it's an older housing stock. An older housing stock has different issues, whether or not they're the condition of the house. And sometimes, especially the older units, they may not be well equipped to handle, people that are, ADA accessibility issues, those kind of things. That's all that chart is, just kind of showing you that the housing stock is an aged housing stock. I'm going to head back to, I want to get to 25, page 25, talking about applicable codes and ordinances. And Danny and I went through all this, and there's, as much as we can find, the codes go back, and the housing codes and the other ordinances go back to 1977. So one thing I am going to recommend in here is starting a code enforcement and a building code enforcement program. You would have to adopt building codes. I'm saying that, and I'm putting that in the goals and objectives, but what I would recommend is you're going to need someone to enforce that. And if it's not somebody on city staff that's capable of doing that, what smaller towns that are in your situation are doing, they're hiring somebody that's retired or whatever, and they bring that person in when somebody's, in the process of building a house, or somebody is repairing a house, those kind of things. And then you pass that cost on to, in other words, you're not bringing in someone on staff to do that. You're calling them or bringing them in on an as-needed basis. This is stuff like the plumbing code, the electrical code, fire, all that. I mean, maybe fire is fire marshal, but especially the plumbing and the electrical and those kind of things. Because at the end of the day, the codes are there to protect the person that's building the home, right? We don't want somebody to start building a house and then the plumbing's bad and the fire, it's not equipped up to proper codes, at least. I would recommend 2015 and above, right? But that's one of the things I recommended in the goals and objectives. That's one of the ordinances. And the code enforcement, when I talk about code enforcement, building codes is what I talk about, the mechanical and the plumbing and the electricity. But the other codes are junk vehicles and weed debris and those kind of things. And a code enforcement officer that's employed by the staff could do that. Sometimes cities have got, sometimes they send you guys out there to take care of that. They send y'all to go learn these enforcement codes. And so that's just another code that's available to you guys, okay? And that's, when I talk about the goals and objectives, obviously we looked at kind of what was here and what can we do? Here's what we have. Here's some of the issues we have. What can we do? And that's on page 26, talking about goals and objectives. There's a few programs on goal 1, objective 1 through 4. I've listed some basically housing rehabilitation programs that are out there. It's not that you're taking care of it, but you're acting like the first one is what they call a home program. It comes from Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and it's for people who own their own home and it's in really sad shape, and then they're low to moderate income persons. The money comes to the city, and the city pays the contractor on behalf of the owner. So it's not like the money would go directly to the homeowner. It's a difficult program, I'm not going to lie to you, but it's one of the only ones I know that lately what we've done over the last, our company has kind of gotten out of that business, but there are still companies that do that kind of work. You apply for the money, you get it, then you start asking people for applications. They come in, and then you go through a process of getting them approved through the department. But what is occurring, they used to fix or rehabilitate houses. Now they're going to take them all the way down to the ground and then build a new house. Part of the problems we run into is they only give you, I think it was up to, last time I checked, it was $135,000 per house. You can't get a lot of house done with that kind of money. But it's one of the only programs that we know of that can assist people that have a house that's in disrepair and can't afford to fix it. What it does to the housing stock, I mean, what happens is people, they have a home and then it starts to deteriorate over the years, and then they can't fix it, those kind of things. And it turns in from, let's just say it was a blue home in a deteriorated state that was only maybe the roof or siding or paint, and then it turns into bigger problems, right? The siding starts to deteriorate to a point where it's got holes in it, those kind of things. But that's one of the programs that can help the citizens. There's number 2 is a housing preservation grant. I've used this before. Haven't done it in several years, but what it would do, it doesn't give you a new house, but what it does is it gives, I think at the time it was about $25,000 per house. We were able to get in there and kind of gut a lot of houses, and we were able to do the siding, roof, and come in there and do the plumbing and the electricity, and then of course put back up the walls, the insulation, those kind of things. But it's a smaller one, and it's administered through USDA, and it's just another option that's available. Once again, I mean, when I say the city and you, it's kind of filtered through you guys, where you're kind of coordinating with helping the homeowner get the help they needed, right?
Would the homeowner be responsible for that 25% of matching funds?
No, see, that's no, it would definitely come down to you. It would come to the city. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't say that. There is, on the first program I mentioned, there's a little bit of match, but they've kind of done away with most of that, especially in cities your size. They've kind of gotten to where it's like 0 or 1%. But with this one, yes, it would definitely come back to you guys. Section 504 home repairs, another one from USDA. These are small. Typically, they're only doing weatherization kind of things. Y'all probably seen USDA weatherization programs. I don't know if have y'all ever seen that in the city before?
We had something with the electric company came in.
Okay.
Anybody that was on electricity for their heating or cooling, they came in and insulated the attic.
Okay, very good. This is sort of similar, but it's USDA and it's weatherization. You know, they're doing windows and doors and stuff, and that's kind of, I think those things are like $7,500, maybe $10,000. So they usually are administered by the county or whoever, the local USDA, but it's usually comes through the county is usually the one that's got that program. Y'all, mainly for you guys from the city council and the city, is like trying to, if people come in, like you can know where to send them if they need assistance, because it's not like you can actually apply on that for them. They would have to go to whoever's administering that program. Okay, another number 4 talks about vacant, dilapidated structures. Something I've seen communities kind of be successful at. If there's a few that are in the city that need to be, sometimes they're like, they're tax trust properties, somebody's abandoned them, they're just there. I don't know if y'all have a lot of that here, but what the cities were doing was they were getting together with the school district and the county and working out an arrangement where it belonged to the city. Then the city can dispose of it, and then obviously you got to go through all the notification about, hey, you know, this person, whoever has been on this tax, usually they've been on a tax trust forever, right? They're generating no money for any of these entities. But what they were doing, some of these other communities were doing, was getting that into the city's possession, demolishing, and then reselling that for just almost nothing to someone who put a house there, because once you put a house there, now it's contributing a taxable property, right? That's just another program that I'm putting in here. That's something other communities are doing with vacant, dilapidated structures, right? The dilapidated structures, they're just, a lot of times they're just there, and you know, you don't want kids playing around there and all that kind of stuff. So it can be a danger to the community, especially depending on how bad they are, right? Okay, and then number 2, I talk about, that was the building code enforcement program. Adopt the most recent international codes, and then see if you can find somebody, a licensed professional somewhere nearby that would come and do this on an as-needed. I can't imagine you're going to need a lot. I don't know how often you would need this person, but whatever they're charging, whoever needs the inspection, cost would be onto them. That way you're not out any money, so it would be on the homeowner's responsibility. And code enforcement program I talked about, I mentioned hiring on goal 3. I mentioned hiring a full or part-time code enforcement officer, but this is the other stuff. This is just like this is not the building codes. This is weed and debris, junk vehicles, those kind of things. And that's something either A, you can bring somebody in. I know y'all have limited staff, or you can train somebody that's currently on staff to do this kind of work. Okay? And then the number 4 is just increasing the city's stock of quality single-family units. It kind of goes back to what the other program I was talking about, going through and getting rid of some of those units that are there and replacing those dilapidated units with newer units that are now contributing to the tax base. Also, you could host seminars, say, hey, here's some programs that are out there. It's kind of like everybody's here tonight. I'm kind of telling y'all some of these programs are out there. Texas Department of Housing, Community Affairs, TDHCA, they typically have these programs. So, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
These contract with other cities to like maybe have one of their code enforcement officers
Absolutely.
come over 2 or 3 days a month.
That's another great idea. And in fact, I'll mention that in here. I'll revise this part because, yeah, in fact, I have several cities out west that's what they do. They're all cities are smaller. They're your size, maybe 1,000 people, whatever, and they're going through the same issues. And so that's what they're doing. They're getting inspectors, those kind of things. And I had one guy that was a building inspector for one city, and he would actually go do the building inspections at the other community. And he would do all of them. He would do the code enforcement and the building. And then y'all were working out some kind of rate with this person or whatever it might be. Like I said, especially if it's a building, if somebody needs to have building codes because they're doing construction, I would pass that on to the person that's asking for that inspection, okay? All right, so this is that's the end of the housing chapter. You guys are here. What are some of the things that y'all see as far as related to housing? Y'all have any comments or questions on that? You guys, council?
Well, there's definitely a shortage of options. There's families that would like to move to this community, and there's just not a lot of housing options.
Yes.
So, objective 4, I think, is a good suggestion to move forward with.
I think one of the unique things that you guys are running into now, and you just kind of hit on it. First of all, workers and people and companies, the workers especially, are more mobile now, right? A lot of people are working from home. They don't need to live in the city, and they'd prefer to be in these smaller towns, right? Quieter schools, all those kind of fun things. And so sometimes what happens is like if there's a business that's trying to come in and they can't find housing for their workers, it kind of stunts you guys a little bit on the economic development side, right? Because they need to know if somebody's bringing in a business here, they need to know where the workers are going to. In fact, I was just in another city 2 weeks ago, and what had happened was they were developing a lot of RV parks, but they weren't RV parks. They turned into, that's where the workers were living, right? So remember the oil stuff came in and they were setting up man camps and things like that. So that's obviously we don't want to go in that direction, but so we've got to find other alternatives to increasing the quality of the overall housing stock. So that's kind of where this whole chapter is getting toward. Okay. I'll move into population. So there's a whole bunch of information at the beginning. That's all census data. I'm on page 30 through 33. I'll let y'all can go through that. I'm going to get to where we're at, where we think y'all are. Page 34 was, we counted 326 occupied units. Now this was last year, so there could be some changes. So, and then the census 2020 census said there was 282. So we're already counting 46 units, which is, that's 150 extra people that the census missed. So we're coming up at 926. I don't remember what 2020, didn't it say 5? Yeah, I'm just telling you, the numbers where we got them from is our guys, Dalton. I don't know if you were driving around. Our guys are just driving around the city, counting the houses and putting them on the map. So, and then coming up with the numbers. So it was basically a field survey of exactly how many occupied units are in the city at that time. So, and then we're multiplying it by persons per household. So we came up with 926. Page 35 kind of shows your projections. The green one is very aggressive and very, we're hopeful that you'll get to that number. Out to 2035, 1,570 people. And then, of course, on the bottom is more of a minimum. That was created, the method for the minimum was created using the Water Development Board figures. They're notoriously low, but so we hope that you'll, within the next 15 years, be somewhere in that meaty part and maybe toward the high part. A lot of that will have to do with businesses that come in, any residential developments that come in. You know, there's maybe something we can't foresee right now. Somebody develops a subdivision that could add, any subdivision that's got 100 or 200 people is going to, you're going to be adding quite a bit of people if that does occur. So I think we had talked one time about trying annexation toward the highway, those kind of things, but
Yeah, with the new laws, it's
very difficult. What used to happen is, Dalton, get me back to the base map, if you can. Okay, yeah, give me right here. What used to happen, you can't do this anymore, but cities would just annex the highway down, right? They literally would annex the highway and that's it. They won't let you do that anymore. So I had a lot of cities that looked like spider webs or spiders, because you had little tentacles coming out like this, and they were all, they fixed that, or the legislature fixed that, because you have to have a minimum of 1,000-foot strip. You can't just annex the road anymore. And I know why communities do that, because like I said, they're trying to get down to the highway in case business starts to come in at that intersection where 16 and the interstate connect, right? Eventually stuff will start popping up there. So there is another way. I mean, the other way to get there is kind of talking to the property owners along the way and see if they want to volunteer, come into the city limits. A lot of times they won't, but there's other things that you could do in exchange for them coming in, you know. There's, you know, abatements, those kind of things. But that's just another strategy. If that's your goal and you want to try to get down there, it can be done. It's not impossible, but it's definitely harder.
that map overlays the floodplain map, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can see the floodplain. That's correct. I'm sorry, you're right. So you can see up here, we got a ton of floodplain up there and floodplain down in here. And it does, obviously with floodplain, we're talking about, and by the way, the floodplain changed 4, 5, 6 years ago. All the flood maps in the state. So what do y'all think happened? More people are now in the floodplain than used to be. I don't know if any of y'all have had that happen to you guys. But when they redid the maps, and it's not something the city can do. FEMA or the National Flood Insurance Program sends these guys out here to delineate that floodplain. And it definitely had a lot of repercussions across the state. There was cities, property owners that were being notified that they were in the floodplain. They'd never been in the floodplain ever. Never flooded there, but that's just something that there's not a lot of control you have over that. Obviously, if you're in the floodplain, you're required to have flood insurance, especially if you got a note on the house, a mortgage, those kind of things. You're going to have flood insurance, right? So thank you for that, Danny. I forgot all about that. Okay, y'all have any questions on population? Good. Okay, and then the land use. Bring up. Of course, this is the existing land use map. The yellow, which is, yellow is going to be your single family residential. The brown is more of the manufactured housing. The red is commercial. The blue, public. The light green is going to be like recreational, those kind of things. Public can be anything. It could be the water, where the wastewater plant, it could be schools, all those things. City hall, those kind of things go into the public. Showing you where the manufactured homes, the reds are the commercials, and then there's some light that we showed you. I believe those were multifamily duplexes, right? Yeah. So that's what this is showing. It's not a zoning map, so I don't want anyone to get. This is not a zoning map. It's just this is existing. This shows you what the conditions are right now. Based on our survey, based on our field survey, what's there now. So the next one is the future land use map, which is kind of all that green out there is still what we categorize as ag. So it could be anything. It could just be raw land. This is not a zoning map either. This is just a future land use map of when you look at a perspective of how you would like the city to grow. You'd like to see the commercial corridors coming along these highways out here, and a lot of that single family filling in, single family residential, and then of course, the commercial coming down along the corridor down to the south. So, but once again, this is not a zoning map. This is just a precursor in case you were to redo zoning or enact zoning. You would need a future land use map prior to that. Okay? So it's not like if someone's got something now and we've listed it as something else, it has no effect on that person's property. It doesn't raise their tax rates. It doesn't do any of that. This is a planning mechanism for the city. That's what the future land use map is. And as you can see with this map, we did actually kind of go out into the ETJ area that we talked about, right? And then we filled in all the holes that were vacant in the other one, and we've come all the way out to the ETJ. And it's just kind of a blueprint for the city of how your best guess as to how this might grow. We don't know all the variables. Somebody may own property somewhere that we think may be single family, and they're not ever going to, it's been in the family forever, and it's never going to get sold, and so it may not ever become what this looks like. The only way the future land use map ever gets, the only tool that is used to shape the land use is the zoning. So it cuts both ways, right? It's first of all, I've heard people get upset because, hey, I don't, there's the reason some people want zoning is because there's a neighborhood wherever it might be, right in here that's been here forever, and then one of their neighbors comes in and puts a bar or something in there. If without zoning, there's really no other way to stop that. On the other hand, zoning is you're putting regulations on people's property, so it kind of works both ways on that. So once again, we've given you a sample of draft zoning ordinance, and it aligns with the subdivision regulations, but don't adopt it until y'all let me know if y'all want to move on that. And it could be 2 years from now y'all decided y'all want to do something with it, and just call me and I'll walk you through that process. Okay? So by approving this plan or accepting it, you're not adopting either one of these ordinances. That needs to be done as a separate process. Okay? But part of the grant paid for these draft ordinances for you guys. So, and I've used these in many cities. I've dealt with cities that have never had zoning. I've had at least 3 about your size anywhere. Well, one of them was about 500 people. One of them, I dealt with another city that was close to 5,000 people. They had never had zoning before, and they'd been around since 1800. So you're talking about jamming something on. In other words, it didn't all fit properly, right? So there was a lot of people trying to get variances and people doing zoning changes through the first year or so because they had never dealt with zoning, never had zoning before, but the community wanted to put it in because the zoning tool is what is how you get to this point. Okay? All right. Y'all got any questions on the housing, the population, land use?
So on the housing,
Yeah.
how alarming are those numbers with the, if I get back to the.
Sure.
Where's it? What page does it show all the percentages of housing?
Oh, the age?
Yeah, and like
Okay.
dilapidated and.
Well, okay, go back to the first table I showed you.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Okay, here on
That's
page 19.
yeah, page 19, right, correct.
33% of our housing is single family
Correct.
structure. 21.8% is deteriorated single family, and 10% is dilapidated single family.
Okay.
How alarming is that to you in comparison
Yes.
to other communities our size?
It's getting there, and what I'm more concerned about is the deteriorated plus the dilapidated. Meaning, if the deteriorated doesn't improve, it usually falls into dilapidated, right? Yeah, exactly.
Homes and
Yeah, and
all that
manufactured
stuff on top
homes.
of there, then it just really.
Manufactured homes is another issue, right? Because you're not going to repair a manufactured home. It would usually be replaced, but hopefully with a new manufactured home. They're way better now than they used to be, right? What some communities struggled with was what we called transitional housing, to where people were just rolling in an old RV kind of thing, looking thing. Remember those old, like, those little round things you'd haul behind? I saw those as houses in some communities, where they just roll them onto the lot, hook them up. And see, this is where the city would come in, is we can't hook you up. If it's anything built before, they kind of did away with that, as even the manufactured housing laws are like, they need to be anything built after 76. But 76 is almost 50 years ago. Manufactured homes are not really designed to last that long. However, the new ones they're really good. But part of zoning and those kind of things is there's actually in the zoning, we've got two different categories of manufactured housing. One of them is a manufactured home park, which is where there's an owner and everybody rents, right? Everybody, they don't own the land, the property guy owns the land, right? And these people bring in their manufactured homes and they stay there, right? But it's still owned by the person. But however, there's still standards that are in the zoning. So we need this, they need to be skirted, there's going to be streets, there's going to be, so there's standards in there. The second one is a manufactured home subdivision, which is almost, I see a lot of these, I've seen these in San Antonio, they're really nice. But I mean, it's designed like a subdivision. You buy your property and the manufactured home. So you own both. That's the difference between those two manufactured home delineations. One of them is you own your land and the manufactured home. So back to your original. It's a big number, yeah. It's a big number, but it doesn't. There's no magic to take them all out now and replace them, or help people that are in there replace them. It's slow process. Part of this plan is to make you you're aware. If councils 2 years from now look at this, they're aware of these issues and continue to work toward it, because typically it's not going to happen in 1 or 2 cycles. It's going to take some time, because even if you were to run one of these programs that replaces homes, you're only going to get about anywhere from 4 to 6 homes done. It's still good, but it's still, if they're dilapidated and vacant, that's another issue to me. That's where I would really recommend y'all removing them and at least try to get a structure there. Because what happens is nobody wants to sell it because they think, like, let's say the entity is when we talked about that other program earlier, it's a vacant, dilapidated structure and it hadn't paid taxes in 10 years, but it's still there. It's on the tax rolls, tax trust, right? But it's not generating you guys any money. It's not generating the school. Unfortunately, it has a value. Well, that really doesn't, does it? Until that house structure is removed and another unit's there and somebody is now occupying it, now it's generating ad valorem taxes for you guys and the city. But sometimes the entities look at it as a value, but it's really not a value, right? If it's not producing.
Acquiring those properties.
You work it out. I'm not the attorney, so I just know that they do it. So, but you've got to identify the property and then get with the other 2 entities where they're legally sending whatever their interest is in it to the city. The whole goal is to get it into, maybe it doesn't have to be the city, maybe the county wants to do it, and the school and the city send it to the county.
Our taxes are so low, we don't really have that many properties that the taxes aren't being paid on. We have plenty of them that are dilapidated that we can condemn or abate, but we don't have that many that I deal with the tax attorney.
That hasn't.
The list is very short on the ones that are behind on taxes.
Very good. Okay.
Can you help me on the census numbers?
Yeah.
Is it skewed our low to moderate income to where the next time we apply for a grant?
That's in fact, we don't know, because that was supposed to be released in April. And we don't know why. They didn't release it when they were supposed to. In fact, I think they were supposed to release them I've said April, I think it was last April. But they didn't release any last April, which is why you're still using 2020 low to moderate income data. They are going to release again this year on April 1st. We don't know, it's not a conspiracy, but we think their numbers were so bad that they didn't want to release it. And what's going to happen is they're going to end up doing, they do the 100% count, right? Where they go out every 10 years count. And I don't know about you guys, but we didn't see any workers. Usually you're always seeing the workers coming around trying to get those people they may have missed. The communities I talked to, that wasn't happening because we're in the middle of a pandemic. It was the middle of 2020. Nobody was getting out, right? Which is why we think some of these numbers, it's across the board. So it's not just you guys. But to answer your question, we won't have that until, and I don't know how it's going to affect that until we see the numbers in April.
One of our biggest challenges has always been, at least for the last 20 years, we're so far out that nobody wants to come build a spec house here. So any new houses are custom houses, and that generally puts them out of the price range of most of the people that live in Strawn. So I don't know how to get over that. I've had lots of meetings with different builders. One of them said if we get the state park going and they see more dollars coming to Strawn, they might consider building, but we don't have anybody out here wanting to build, 50 houses or anything, but it's all just one-offs, and that's a tough sell for Strawn.
It is. Danny brings up, that's a good point. It is true. The things that are in good things are the school district, those kind of things, and these smaller communities are getting more and more commuters or people that are working from home are wanting to move to smaller communities, quieter communities, quality of life issues, because they don't have to go into the office every day, right? But these processes, everything we talk about, these things, it's just trying to get you on the road to looking at these things and doing the best you can along the way. Can't solve everything overnight, but this is a good start, is getting a plan done like this. So. Okay. All right. If no other questions, I'm going to let Derek. Now, Derek's going to talk about your street system, the water, the sewer, and the drainage. So these are the things that make you guys work. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Oh.
Is it possible to do a development agreement whereas they agree to the annexing of the city if the city limits ever reach out that far? And could you include city taxes or hot taxes if you provided those city utilities?
To my knowledge, I know the development agreements. I just don't know if it. I think you're right, though. I think you could work out something to that effect.
Have you ever run across?
I have not run across that because most of the time I'm dealing with communities that the development agreement is in place and that the annexation is already adjacent to their city limits. So I haven't dealt with where I got city limits here and nothing here, and the development agreement says, hey, if you ever get down here, then we're going to come in. But it doesn't mean that that can't be looked at. I don't write development agreements. I have to run across them, and it's a good tool to use.
Where would you go to find that information?
I can give that information to Dave. I think I might know somebody that was working on one of these. I have one community that does a lot of development agreements. They got people coming in all the time. I'll try to get some information for you, and then I could reference that in this plan as an option as well. Yeah, good. Very good. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Good. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, yeah. PMI on this. You guys, all of you up here, I think know me, but we've been working with you guys for a long time. Done a lot of utility projects, in the middle of some utility projects. But as Ken mentioned, we did the water, sewer, streets, and drainage, basically the city's infrastructure plans. And I even debated on whether to bring these up because they're so cumbersome. Most of the meat of what we did are in the maps, very large scale maps. And that's why that's going to be kind of cumbersome to flip through. But I'm going to go over it. And I think I can kind of describe better what's going on rather than trying to flip through that. Also, we're making some updates. I'm updating some things based on some water supply discussions that have been going on recently, very recently. And so we're going to, between the workshop and when we finalize this, there'll be a few changes in that report. So, but
Go forward. This is Derek with Jacob and Martin at Abilene, our city engineers. Everybody else has.
Yeah.
He is here.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, that's my fault.
we've been working for the city for 20 some odd years. So very familiar with your system, water, sewer, all of it. And we actually did a plan very similar to this several years ago. This is kind of an update for us to that plan. So I'm going to start with kind of the higher level thing, which is the water. The streets and the storm are kind of be a lot less to it, but kind of the priority of things for you guys right now, especially, is the water. And we kind of break that into several pieces in the report. First of all, we look at it from both a regulatory standpoint and an actual water use, what you're actually using and having to treat and distribute. And so those two don't necessarily always jive. There can be some differences in what's required there. For you guys, and breaking it down into water supply, treatment, pumping and storage, and then distribution. You'll see this is the water system improvements map that we're looking at. When you look in the report and you go through these maps, you'll see kind of shaded areas like this pinkish purple area. And that's delineating where the improvements that we're going to be recommending are located. And so on the water supply side, starting with that, the city has two different supplies. You've got the lake. You have 400 acre feet of water, 400 gallons per minute of available water through the surface water side. And then you've got the groundwater wells that were put in a few years ago down at Desdemona. You've got 3 wells down there, 80 GPM each. So you've got a total water supply availability right now of 640 gallons per minute. And to kind of give you an idea where that puts you, your peak flow at your treatment plant, last we checked, was about 200, I believe it was around 250 GPM. So you've got some room available in your water supply. We've talked about several things. As I said, we've been having very recent discussions within the last few days and before about water supply and how to accommodate future water supply needs for you guys. There's talk about raising the dam at Lake Tucker, which has been in discussion. We've talked about that off and on for years. There's a capability to do that, but there are water rights issues and permitting issues that come into play that may make that, if not impossible, very difficult to achieve. But as you can see through the planning period, the next 20 some odd years or so, your water supply needs are pretty good through the next 12, 15 years. And so I think looking beyond that, we need to be talking about, what are we going to do? And I think maybe drilling additional wells because the break even there is not that far away, even at that 15-year mark. So I think continuing to investigate the dam is something that needs to be done, and other options. And there's a lot of talk right now about what other options are out there. And I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion on that would be in a form we could put in this report. There's just too many variables. But what we do, a known quantity would be wells. And so that's something we're probably going to include in the report that's not specifically stated now, but I'm going to add that in. And so we need to, the wells that you have are producing pretty well. I think they've been very reliable so far. We're going to do some testing on those in the very near future and see if they're still holding up the same capacity rating that we had originally. I think they probably will be. But groundwater is something you've got to monitor regularly as you go, because you don't want to be caught in a situation where you think everything's fine and then you start pumping really heavy and all of a sudden they're not there. So that's something we're going to be looking at. But water supply wise, you're actually in pretty decent shape for the next several years. I think obviously the 640 GPM and you're peaking out at about 250 or so, or a little over right now. So you could pretty much double what you're currently doing and still be okay on the water supply side. On the water treatment side, I don't know how familiar anyone here is with the treatment system that you have, but you've got what we would consider a conventional water treatment plant, and that includes a clarifier or a settling basin, essentially, kind of a modern version of just a simple settling basin. And then 3 multimedia filters, which are just sand and gravel and anthracite. And I'm not even sure at the moment, you got 2 of those operational, and they're kind of teetering. They're not in good shape. And so Over the years, we've rehabbed one or two of them. It's time again to do something with them, but the basins are in bad shape, the plumbing, all of that kind of stuff. So you guys actually have a project. There's a project that's already funded to replace those old filters with new, more modern filters. They're membranes. They're a totally different type of filtration. But they're much more efficient, and you can get a lot more capacity through a much smaller footprint. So that funding is in place, and that's being worked on. So you'll see, and I didn't talk, I'll go back a little bit and talk about kind of how we broke this out. But in your first priority improvement recommendations, that's the first thing we talk about. And so that will not only bring your treatment plant up to date as far as the condition of it, it'll also add some additional capacity, treatment capacity to the plant. Right now, your plant is capable of 480,000 gallons a day. And that 640 gallons per minute of supply equates to about 900,000 gallons a day. So there's a gap between what the supply you have available and what you can actually treat. And so these microfilters will also bring up that capacity availability for you. And these newer filters are built so that they're very easily expandable. So we'll build it out so that it could be expanded into even more capacity down the road, depending on what happens. So that's one of the high priorities. Stepping back just a second. So the way these are broken out, and you'll see in the report, at the end of each report, we break down our recommendations into three priority phases. So 1 to 5 year would be the first priority, 6 to 10 years, and then 11 to 20. So it's a 20-year planning period. And so that first 1 to 5 year is the plan improvements, in addition to some other things. Pull up another. Some other things at the treatment plant. There are also, you look at pumping and storage capacity. You're pretty good on that. We're actually showing that you're good with what you've got capacity-wise. The size of the tanks, the volume of the pumps that they put out are good throughout the planning period. Now that doesn't account for maintenance. You got to replace pumps from time to time, but from a capital improvement standpoint, we show that that's good. On the distribution line side, you've got a lot of old cast iron, AC, asphaltic concrete lines. Those are kind of antiquated materials to use. And so part of that first year priority is to replace some of that old line with some upsized plastic pipe that would last longer. And that's what you see. If you look, our first year priority is actually replace just upsizing the 4-inch line that runs east of town. That's the green shaded area. But that pink shaded area in the middle is actually our 6 to 10 year, one of our 6 to 10 year priorities. And that's replacing old cast iron lines downtown. And that's what we determined to be the highest priority for line replacement in town.
You can probably articulate this a whole lot better than we can for everybody else. Kind of explain to everybody the grant that we have in place and for replacing the pipes downtown and the microfiltration out the plant. So when all that's taking place, it's going on now, but when we should see it completed or when everybody else should see it completed.
Yeah. And that's something else I was going to go into, and it's as good a time as any kind of segue into that. But so there are multiple programs to fund utility improvement projects, or really any infrastructure project. You guys are currently tapping a couple of them. You're using the microfilter project at the water treatment plant was one that's being funded through the Texas Water Development Board, and they typically would fund larger scale projects dollar-wise. The downtown, we've got a project that's also currently underway to replace some of the lines downtown, cast iron lines, and that's along North Front and then Houston, I believe. And that's being funded through the same community development program that Ken mentioned. He said that also is used to fund water and sewer. Well, that's what we're using for that. And they're typically between $300,000 and $500,000 grants. This particular one was $350,000. We're going to be applying again, I think, for the next round coming up pretty soon. Those, I think, will be $500,000. But anyway, that program has historically funded water and sewer projects almost exclusively. They actually are ranking better for paving projects now too, and you guys have used it for similar projects in the past. But that's what's being used for that line replacement project, and the plans have just been completed for that. In fact, I think it's going out for bid within the next week or two. I don't know, you might remember, Dalton.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it's ready to go. We'll be taking bids sometime in the next couple of months. It should be ready to go out for construction. We've got to time it right with what's going on downtown right now, because that is downtown. But yeah, that program funds that. You guys have also used USDA Rural Development to fund utility projects in the past. They also typically fund larger projects, and all of those agencies have different levels of funding, grant and loan. And the question Danny asked about the median household income, or the low to moderate income, that is a huge factor in how we get these projects funded, because typically they provide better funding to low to moderate income areas. So it's just kind of the way it is. But you guys have been fortunate to be able to tap some of that in the past, and I would expect you will in the future as well. So just kind of go through real quickly. I mentioned the meters. That first year, 1 to 5 year priority, we also included radio read meters. We've had a lot of discussion in the last year or two about the accuracy of your meters, and as meters get older, they tend to not read as accurately. And they're also manual read meters. And so another thing that we're doing through this project is replacing all these manual read meters with radio read meters, so they can be read from a central location or by just driving by. And they also have logging capabilities so that you can read those. You can see what they're doing over time, and you can catch leaks and things like that faster that way and tell if they're reading off. So also the SCADA system, which is the system that controls the pumps and the tank levels and the plant operation. That's something that's pretty old. You kind of got two different components. When we did the Desdemona wells, we put in a newer system down there, but the plant has a kind of a separate system that's an older technology. So we're going to upgrade all of that and bring it into compliance, and that's all part of that 1 to 5 year priority as well. And then I mentioned the 4-inch water line upsize on the east side of town. That is actually, there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, the line needs to be replaced, but part of this water supply discussion revolves around the fact that you guys are actually connected. There's a line connecting from Strawn all the way to Lake Palo Pinto. There's water line in place and connected that far. So with larger lines going that direction, and it's large line from about the end of this 4-inch on. So larger lines going that direction will allow for emergency water supply at least to be brought all the way to Strawn or back the other way, depending on what happens. So that's a very big component especially in times of emergency. So on the second year priority, 6 to 10 year priorities, some of those downtown replacements that I mentioned, cast iron lines going up Central and other areas there. And I'm not going to read off every street we have, but you can see the line there. And then you've also got some line and some improvement that are being proposed as part of development. Danny mentioned kind of the way development's going here, but you do have somebody north of town that is considering putting some meters out there, but there's no infrastructure going that way. So one of the things that we've included is a line going north of town and some pump station improvements to accommodate that. And that's on that 6 to 10 year time frame as well. The legislature, within the last year or so, I think it was right after Snowmageddon, this has kind of been staged in. This hit when we had the hurricane a while back in Houston. This kind of became a hot topic, and they passed some regulation that played into this. But after the big ice storm, they enacted law related to providing emergency generation for all utility systems. And so that's something, you can kind of phase it in, but it's something you eventually have to do. So that 6 to 10 year time frame priority also includes putting generators at the water plant and at your lift stations in some of those locations. So, and again, that's a mandated thing, so it's something that needs to be planned for starting immediately. Mentioned the 8-inch, some of the main lines downtown, the cast iron lines. Also the tanks at the water treatment plant, the clear wells, which is the storage when you treat the water. That's the first place it goes into a storage system that you can then pump out of. Those have to be maintained over time. Periodically, they have to be recoated. So in that time frame, we've also got recoating those tanks. And the clarifiers that I mentioned, they're big circular basins out there, and they're steel, just like these tanks I mentioned, and they're just painted. They're epoxy coated, and the clarifiers themselves are similar to that. One of them is in really bad shape. The other one is not so bad, but they both are in pretty serious need of recoating, and so so that's part of what's included in that, and that would be early in that 6 to 10 year time frame. Once we get the new filters in place, the level of use of those clarifiers will change. So we're kind of evaluating that right now to see how much work needs to go into those. But they at least one and some amount of maintenance needs to occur on both of them, and one of them probably needs to be completely redone. So, and then for the longer term, on the wastewater side, excuse me, on the water, on the 11 to 20 year time frame, completing some line loops around town. You know, in a water system, if you've got a straight dead end line that goes a significant distance, it creates two potential issues. One is you tend to lose pressure as it goes out toward the end of that dead end line. And the second one is we put chlorine or some form of chlorine into the water to disinfect it so it stays safe throughout the distribution system. And on a dead end line, that disinfectant tends to reduce and fade away as you go down toward the end of the line. So looping lines where there are dead ends allows that to circle around and maintain that residual better, and also maintain the pressure better. So those are some things that need to be looked at in the long term, as well as just generally replacing other old deteriorated lines around town. Ran through that pretty quick. Are there any questions about the water?
When do you expect the microfilters to finish online?
So we're working on the preliminary designs on that now. As I said, the funding's already in place. Putting in these new filters requires a lot of upfront review by the state, the TCEQ, and so there's probably several months of review process that have to take place before we can actually put a bid out for construction. So I'm thinking this is going to be end of year, early next year before that'll actually go under construction. So.
How much disruption to water will that create? I mean, I know they're on skids and you just kind of come in and plug and play, but is there like an hour or two that they're out without water, or is it a day or two or a week?
So you mentioned they're skid mounted, so that's a big aspect of it. But you know, in this case, it's not going to be too bad. It kind of depends on where you have to put them and what room you have to install them. If we had to go back and put them where the old filters were, you'd be talking about significant time. But our plan is to build a separate area for them to sit, and then we'll move them in, plumb them in, and then we can take the old ones offline. The changeover of the plumbing is all you'll have. It'll probably be, you know, if we and the contractor and the city do it correctly, it's probably a half a day, something like that. So, yeah, and we have the wells, so we can supply it during that time, even if it carries over.
You talk about digging more wells. Would you suggest that we dig more wells where we already have wells, or would you suggest going deeper into the aquifer?
Well, yes to both, no to both. Probably close to where they're at, and that's because the reason for that is because the infrastructure is there. If we try to move too far away, then you've got a lot of cost involved in line work and pumping and storage and different things. If we can get them reasonably close to where the others are currently at, we can use the same storage and the same piping infrastructure to get it.
How close is the edge of the aquifer?
You're pretty close. I'm trying to think. It extends a little ways west, but it definitely, you know, you're out toward the end of it. But I will say that those wells tested really well, and they seem to have held up pretty well. They're not all that deep, so that's kind of an indicator that you're in a pretty good pool. But it stretches out over toward Leon, 20 miles or so, something like that. I would guess, you know, without looking at the map, it's kind of, and it varies, you know, spatially, but we're definitely out on the end of on the edge of the aquifer, generally speaking. So
that's what I was asking. We'll have to go deeper into it as opposed to.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, ideally you'd move a little bit east, but relatively close to where they're at. I'm talking a mile or less from where they're at. Again, because that infrastructure cost gets pretty high pretty quick, and so. But I think you can get, another well or two like the ones you've got in the same general area without having a huge impact. That's one of the reasons we're going to test those and see, if they're still, all three of them pumping, are they still pumping what they should be? And I think it appears as though they are. We're going to do some heavy pumping and verify that and see. And that'll tell us if we need to move further than we think.
Put that infrastructure and the 3 wells and everything that's connected to it.
How long did it take?
No.
Well, probably a couple of years, I guess.
Yeah, about 3 years, but it was part of that due to we ran into a land acquisition issue that slowed everything down. And it was funded through 4 different agencies.
Yeah, that was a big part of it too. And the state park was involved in it. And so there were a lot of different concerns that had to be addressed for different parties, and that delayed it. If it was one funding agency and there wasn't a major issue with land acquisition, it's a 18-month process typically, something like that. So.
We were just notified a couple of months ago that TCQ laid on a requirement to identify any lines we have that may have lead in them, older lines, which, I mean, some of this stuff's 100 years old. We're just going to pothole it and look at it and see what's there. Did you mention anything to add in plans as far as near-term goals? Or?
Well, I think the general water line replacement and it is, you're talking about taking care of those lines in particular. Yeah, you're going to see that possibly in some of your old cast iron lines. It's rare to find it in a distribution system anymore. It's usually on the customer side of the distribution system, but identifying it and getting it done is your mid to long term.
We don't have a responsibility to identify on the customer side, do we?
No. Although there's been some debate about that, but no. But again, timing wise, identifying those and then creating a project and taking care of it is going to take some time. That's a mid-year to mid priority to long-term priority project, and that's where we've got in replacing those cast iron lines. So, that answer your question? Okay. Anything else on the water?
Are you going to sewer next?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Is my understanding that the 6 to 10 year plan was to put water north? How are we going to wait 10 years for Ranger Ridge to get water?
Yeah, it's on the 6 to 10 year priority for our plan. That's going to depend heavily on the developer, and the developer is driving that timeline and the financing of it. So it could very well move faster than that, but as a priority for the city, I think water supplies and treatment is a bigger concern, and that's why we prioritize those quicker. If the financing is put in place by the developer, then that time frame can move as quickly as they want it to.
And if my understanding is the water meters were in the first goal of the time period?
That's correct.
That we wasn't happening.
Yeah, before Mike retires. Before Mike retires.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Did y'all recognize how much, as far as road integrity, that y'all disrupt putting these lines in? And if so, is there a second phase to fix those roads back, or is it in this grant to do so, as far as the roads, stuff like that?
So it is undoubtedly going to be a significant impact to the roads. One thing we're doing on this project downtown that we mentioned is we're directionally boring that. That's becoming more and more common, especially in congested areas and the brick streets. That was really the main driver in doing that, so we didn't have to disturb those brick streets, or at least minimally. And so a lot of the areas in the more congested areas in downtown will most likely be done that way. That doesn't require as much disturbance of the street. In areas where there's a line in the street on an asphalt street, that would generally be trenched, and when they go in and trench it, they will be that contractor will go back and repave it to the extent that he disturbed it. On streets like the ones you've got, and this is common in most of the places we work, those streets are so old that they tend to, any disturbance is going to create a pretty significant footprint. Most of the utility funding that's out there will not pay for a full width street replacement. But we do have the street program that I'm going to go into a little bit that might address some of that. So, anything else? Okay, thank you. So I'll go into the wastewater. The water is really just the volume of work and need is the bigger component of all this. But on the wastewater side, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So, let's see what. Go to M. Yeah, that's it. By the way, as Ken mentioned, I don't think I said this, but obviously a big advantage to these planning grants that like we're doing is the inventory of your system. Just like the housing, you get an update inventory of your water and sewer systems and other things. And so that's actually, for a community your size, that tends to be a big deal down the road. And so it's really good that you've got up-to-date information. So on the wastewater side, the map will look similar to the water in that we've kind of highlighted the areas that are proposed, especially the high priority areas to be worked on. So there's a couple of things on the sewer system. The sewer plant, and you have a pond system. You have a facultative lagoon and two other ponds there and that's your treatment system. That's what we consider a natural treatment system, as opposed to a mechanical plant where you've got basins with mechanical components. And it works really well, especially in this part of the world. And so your capacity at that plant is 100,000 gallons a day of effluent coming out of the plant. And the permit you have allows you to take whatever that amount is and irrigate it onto the land that you have around the plant. We put in a center pivot system some years ago to do that. And so, the capacity of a wastewater plant is not, you really don't look at it the same way you do on a water plant because there's kind of a hard and fast number on a water plant. It's a certain number of connections times a certain factor, and that's the capacity you have to have. On a wastewater plant, it really just has to do with how much you're putting in there and how much you're taking out. And at this particular plant, it's rated for 100,000 gallons a day, but you guys, I don't think you've discharged anything out of that plant. You haven't irrigated anything since it's been there. So you basically have, the full capacity of that plant available to you. And so we're not showing any need there as far as capacity through the planning period. And I wouldn't expect that you would need it. And that's, even if you were looking at a discharge where you're actually just running it out into the stream, you would have the capacity for somewhere around 900 to 1,000 connections. And so you don't have near that many on it right now. But anyway, the capacity of the plant is in pretty good shape. I think that really as far as the wastewater system is concerned, from what we've determined and talking to staff, is inflow and infiltration. And that generally occurs mainly through manholes, but also through, deteriorated lines where the lines have broken. And in your case, after looking at it, we've kind of been through this quite a bit over the last couple of years. I think it's probably a manhole issue. Old brick manholes that have cracked, even concrete manholes that have cracked. The manholes in areas where it floods and the lids aren't watertight. And so our biggest recommendation, one of our highest priorities, is going to be to test those manholes. And you do that, there's a couple of different ways you can do this, but kind of the conventional way to do it would be what we call smoke testing. And you bring a machine out that basically just blows dyed smoke into a manhole somewhere. And then you just watch and see where the smoke comes out of the ground. And that's how you kind of identify where these problem areas are. And then we would go in and do a program to actually go in and fix those manholes. And so that's one of the higher priorities. I mentioned
like old sewers are, like where we've had houses that had sewer taps. Would that be a big problem for the infiltration as well?
That's certainly a possibility, yes. And that's something else you could identify through the smoke testing as well.
Why is smoke test so expensive?
Why is it so expensive?
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty labor intensive. Yeah, renting the equipment there's a cost there. Let me see what we had on that, but yeah, and I mean it's mainly 60,000. Of course, that's that's a 5-6 year down the road deal. So don't know what the cost will do then, but renting the equipment, buying, you have to buy the smoke canisters, but it takes weeks to do. You got to isolate parts of the system. So you do a segment over here, and then you come back and do a segment over here. And so it takes 2 or 3 people, and they're out there a long time. So it's a labor intensive process. So. I'm sorry?
What area were you smoke testing?
It varies, depends on how the system lays out, but you probably do maybe 3 or 4 city blocks at a time. Maybe more, like I said, as you get kind of further out where it's more sparse, you might could do a larger area, but you look at the system and how it lays out and kind of identify, how it needed to be cordoned off. And so I also mentioned the generators with the water system. It's the same regulations that have been put into place for the wastewater system. Utility systems and generally have to comply with this. And so either generators at or mobile generators for the lift stations and the wastewater plant, to the extent there's not a lot there that requires electrical service, but there is some. And so that's something else that's being recommended as well.
That's in law. Is there a hard pass date that has to be completed by?
No, it technically you have to comply now,
Right.
but they give you leeway in doing that. There's also things you can do in the interim while you're trying to get this project off the ground. Generators are expensive, but more importantly, they're extremely hard to get right now. So you're probably a year just to get a delivery on a generator right now. They accommodate that. I mean, the state will allow you some grace time to get that done. You have to have an emergency action plan that kind of plays into all this, and you can make arrangements with the electric company to help carry you through, and maybe you can, maybe you can't. I mean, every situation is unique, but there are some ways you can kind of buy yourself some time, but technically the rule is in place and compliance is mandatory now. They're just kind of allowing entities the time to get it done, and so.
Your recommendations specify size?
The size?
Yeah.
I don't think we got into that kind of detail. That's a design detail, but for either one of the lift stations, for the main lift station, you're probably in the 50 kilowatt neighborhood. The smaller one, maybe 30. And I'm kind of ballparking it here, but and one thing you could do, which is it's a perfectly legitimate way to comply with the rule, and that's to do a single portable generator that would operate any of the 3 locations. That works well on paper. In practicality, it's a little hard. I mean, if you have an outage and all 3 are out, then you've got an issue there. You have to go from one to the other, back and forth. Somebody would have to be manning that all the time. So, but there are some things you can do to mitigate it. But you've got funding. I'm assuming a question will come about the timing on it, and so I believe it's in the 6 to 10 year time frame, and beyond actually. But getting funding in place. I mean, a couple of generators like that, probably a couple $100,000. So 3 of them, you're driving it up more. So getting funding in place to fund it is going to take some time. These funding agencies generally run on cycles, unless you can afford to just pay for it out of pocket. And so you're talking about a year cycle. So you've got a year or so funding at least, and then you've got, like I said, you've got some design time, and then you've got another year or so delivery, unless that changes and things loosen up, or if it gets worse. So, but anyway, and really, your water supply needs, this is a regulatory requirement, but as long as you can push that off in favor of doing projects that you have to have. I mean, you've got to have water, right? So that's kind of what our thought process is and how we prioritize these. Obviously, these are fluid. I mean, you can change them if you need to. Other things, completing the smoke testing, rehabbing some of the manholes, some lighting at the wastewater plant, so that, you really need that. You've got an irrigation system out there, you've got meters, putting an influent flow meter. So technically, by regulatory statute, you have to monitor the flow coming out of the plant, going into the irrigation system. But since you guys rarely, if ever, irrigate, you need some way you need a monitor of what's coming into the plant. And so an influent meter is the only way you can really do that. And you don't have that currently. So that's one of the items we also put in early in the priority process. As I said, I mean, the manhole issue and the generators are really, as far as big ticket items, what we're looking at. Is there any questions about anything else on the wastewater?
We have an SCP, if we get approval from TCQ this year, where we plan on replacing the three manholes we think are the main problem for the infiltration, but we're really just kind of guessing until the smoke test happens. But I think it's $32,000 that we have to spend doing that, which wouldn't cover the full smoke test. So.
Right.
I think it's 5 and a smoke test.
$5K for smoke test?
No,
5 manholes.
About
That
5.
wasn't the SCP for 5 manholes and a smoke test.
I thought it was 3.
I was thinking 3 on the SCP, but I haven't looked at it. We're waiting on TCQ to tell us yes or no.
And of course, it depends on, your question about the cost, especially on the smoke testing. That's typically an time and expense type thing. So it could be less, but we tried to make sure we didn't get in a situation where it was more than you were expecting. So, and I would suggest on the SEP, if the smoke testing, if the funding isn't available to do the whole thing, we kind of know some areas that are almost certainly a big part of the culprit. So we at least do those areas. That's what I would recommend. Any other questions on the wastewater? I suspect we'll get through the next two pretty quickly, but you want to switch over to the streets? Streets. I don't know where your folder is. I can probably take care of that. So the streets and the drainage both are pretty straightforward, really. What we did on the streets is we came out, just like Ken talked about doing the housing, we came out, we drove all the streets. We kind of graded them to determine, what level of what condition they were in. And this is, again, similar to the other maps. You can see the shaded areas, different colors for different priorities. But based on, the traffic on the street, what volume of use was the street getting compared to the condition it was in. So if it was in pretty poor condition and it was a pretty significant use street, then that would bump it up in the priority. And that's generally how we determine what we recommend the priorities to be. In this case, you can see all the kind of little clover leaf looking areas. Those are intersections that we deemed were in need of repair. And I think talking with staff, that was also kind of the preference there. But so our very first priority was to come in and fix some of these intersections that were getting in pretty bad shape. And of course, they get traffic from both directions, so, and a lot of turning and different things that cause deterioration. So so you can see those locations. In the green shade would be priority 1, and so there are some other streets. Again, I'm not going to go through every street unless you want me to, but those in the green shade would be the first priority streets that we had, and that, again, mainly based on condition and level of use. One thing you'll see in your priority list, the very first thing on there is actually not the first 1 to 5 year priority. It's kind of a yearly maintenance thing. And this is something that's always recommended, but it's rarely something that can be achieved, and it's because you have to have a yearly budget to do this. But especially if you're going to go in and redo some streets, if you actually went through with some portions of this plan, it would be a huge benefit to go in and go through it and do a regular seal coat maintenance program, because these streets are going to deteriorate. A typical asphalt street, you're talking 10 to 15 years on a typical life. Now, obviously, they've used a lot more than that, or a lot longer than that, but that's what you would typically consider a design life on an asphalt street without any kind of maintenance. And so a seal coat program, doing a few streets every year on a rotating basis to keep those streets in good shape will generally keep them from cracking and falling into disrepair like a lot of them are now. That $50,000 a year, I think, is what we put. That number obviously varies, and whether or not you actually do that depends on whether or not you can fund a yearly budget like that. 50,000, quite a bit on seal coat. That would probably do 10 blocks, something like that, worth of street. And then the other thing was on the yearly program is the ditches. What maybe even bigger than the seal coat. If you can keep the drainage off the streets, that will prolong the life of the streets significantly as well. Typically, what happens is the ditches fill up. They sediment up, and or they're just, for whatever reason, the culverts get stopped up and water backs up over the level of the edge of the pavement. Water encroaches underneath the pavement, and then the street will go quickly. And so maintaining the ditches, which will kind of carry over in the stormwater, obviously, but maintaining the ditches would be a huge benefit for your streets as well. And so that's something else we put on the yearly maintenance program. The other street priorities, the 1 to 5 and beyond, is really just various streets throughout town, and you can see kind of where they're all located. But again, based on priority, after the intersections be done, just kind of tackling them, as you go, with the worst being the first, and so on. So, street projects are hard to fund, and they're expensive, and so it's difficult. I think if you look at the cost on that, that 1 to 5 year time frame, we've got about $600,000 worth of construction shown to repair streets, and so it's difficult, and it's hard to come up with the funding to do it. But if the funding were available, that would be the recommendation. Now, I will say that the CDBG grants, especially in this area, this is North Central Texas Council of Government area, as far as how the funding is distributed, and that particular area has started giving much more priority to streets than they used to. In fact, I think they're on par with water and sewer now.
Yes.
And so
You could also go about some of the communities I'm dealing with, about your size. I mean, the COs and bonds is typically how they're made.
yeah,
Because think of it this way, one of these streets or two of these streets is going to eat up the grant. And you're not going to get a grant every cycle. Because the way they've set the grants up is that you're going to get maybe one, maybe two in a 6-year cycle. Okay? So in other words, typically when I get into streets, there's so many other water and sewer needs for the grants that were really your options are, street maintenance, sales tax. I don't even know if y'all are, I don't know where y'all's tax rate is offhand, but going into certificates of obligation and insurance bonds. Obviously, the bonds, these guys would have to decide if that's what they wanted to spend on.
What do y'all calculate like a 2-inch overlay or 1.5-inch overlay on asphalt per foot?
if it's just an overlay, and I'll qualify that after I answer your question. If it's just an overlay, $25 or so a square yard. So
You got to consider, you don't want to overlay if you got base problem.
yeah, I think especially the first priority streets that we're talking about, we would not.
So
I would not waste your money.
You scrape them down to the bare dirt, pack them down, and then come in with the.
Typically, what you would do is mill it and mix the asphalt in the base that's there, and then put an overlay over the top. About $60 a yard, square yard. So
What does that come out to a linear foot on a 30-foot street?
I think that's going to be per linear foot.
Yeah.
It's probably in a couple $100.
So all these, when I was a kid, these were all dirt streets, and the way they got paid is they put it on everybody's water bill. Everybody that lived on the street had to pay a chunk of that, but it was way cheaper in 1982 to do that than what it would be now.
I actually saw that. I did see that in another community where they were doing
Yeah, I agree with Ken. Almost all the projects we do, the street projects, are generally through bonds.
Hold election type thing. Go out
Yeah,
and buy.
well, or CO, but yeah. CO, yeah. The bond is gonna go to the community, you guys are gonna be voting on stuff like that. But typically, streets, what we find is that's, what the residents complain about most is streets, because they're not seeing all the stuff underneath the water in the sewer. So the only time water gets complained about it if you're out of water, or if you don't have pressure, and in the sewer, obviously, if there's issues, backups and stuff. Any questions about streets? Yes, ma'am.
Doesn't TxDOT take care of 16?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. But yeah,
that
is not always the case, but
No, they do.
Wouldn't they do 108?
That's correct. Any, FM or highways, they do. Typically, like I said, that's not always. There's some communities we work for that the city has taken maintenance over on the streets within the city limits. Small community, but that's rare. Anything else? Okay, we'll hit the storm real quick. It's a similar discussion to the streets. Obviously, funding. Yeah, and that's going to be. Yeah. So I think I'll hit the funding aspect of this first because it's basically the same conversation, almost. In this case, the Texas Water Development Board actually has funding that can be used for drainage projects. And so there is some funding, and it's similar funding to what you got for the water. So you can get funding that includes loan forgiveness or grant and zero interest loans for those types of projects. And the legislature just passed, I think it was last year, or the last legislature, some funding to create a flood management fund through the Texas Water Development Board, completely separate fund, and even than the one I was just talking about. The one I started with, that I opened with, is the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. That's been around for years and years, and it will fund drainage projects. But this flood improvement program, I believe, flood management improvement program, they have just implemented it. They got the legislation done and have just started implementing funding within the last few months. But they will fund drainage projects, and again, based on your median household income and those types of things, would determine whether or not you would be eligible for grant funding. But it is a possibility, and so there is some possibility for doing that. Historically, though, drainage has been looked at pretty much the same way as streets. Getting funding to do it has been difficult, and allocating funds through the city budget is also difficult when you've got higher priority things to deal with. And so you can see, I think our highest priority here has to do with the ditches that I mentioned earlier, and that's either improving or creating roadside ditches. And in that case, it was to save the streets. But in this case, we're simply talking about getting the water from one point to the other. And I know up in the kind of the northeast side where that kind of a blue, or supposed to be purple, I think, but it's shaded with the floodplain. But I think that's where we had some significant problems a couple of years ago. But this green is there's really nothing to convey that water out from one side to the other and get it out of those areas. And so that's a pretty significant issue. The other thing is, in addition to the channels themselves, are the culverts. And that's really kind of almost as big, maybe a larger issue. And what happens is these culverts are typically either undersized, because when they were put in, somebody put in a driveway and they just put in a 12-inch culvert or whatever it was, maybe an 8-inch, maybe a piece of PVC, who knows. But they're undersized, or they're crushed and stopped up. I mean, you guys have seen them around town. And so one of the high priorities also was to come in and replace some of the culverts, especially in key areas, to get that water from the start of the drainage to wherever it goes. And then the following year priorities are similar, just other areas and for the same reasons. And so this channel up on the northeast side of town, I think what we called out was cleaning. I think that one's mainly at kind of it's just overgrown, probably settled in over time, and so it needs to be cleaned out. But generally just replacing culverts and cleaning ditch. And I think, so our 1 to 5 year priorities on that was about $370,000 worth of work. And so again, you can see that it's, capital projects with funding being questionable on that. The 6 to 10 year was upgrading culverts, again, under East Oak and the channel up at the top that we talked about. And then kind of just a general that 11 to 20 year time frame was pretty much all of the culverts that we looked at that were undersized. And again, we drove all this out. We measured the culverts in a lot of cases, if it wasn't apparent what they were. And then we went back and our guys ran drainage calculations to determine what the capacity of these culverts were. And so, in this case, and it's typical pretty much across the board whenever we do these, almost all of them are undersized. The question is, how undersized are they? How much will they pass? Will they pass enough that in a heavy rain situation, you're not going to have flooding? Or are they going to back it up to the point that you're going to have potential for flooding? And so the ones that we called out to be replaced, especially in early priorities, are ones that would be critical to that situation. So,
Is that how big? Seems like the culverts that we looked at ourselves.
yeah, you could over time. That is adding a couple of drainage channels, the two green areas on the south side of town, and then replacing some culverts. And yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. Those are obviously two of the, in that priority list, are two of the higher critical ones that would need to be larger also. So the larger they are, the more they cost. And also the harder it is to implement just with local effort. But you could certainly do a lot of these, especially through the long-term time frame, over time through city budget. Obviously, these costs are capital projects that we've kind of lumped stuff together. So, but yeah, that's $370,000 over a 5-year time frame, and all of our costs are going to, except for where we've made a recommendation for yearly maintenance, like on the streets. All of our costs are going to be capital projects that would be budgeted accordingly. If you were having somebody do it. So.
And how does that work? Like everything north of the tracks drains into the creek, but everything on the south side of the tracks basically drains into these two ponds here that are basically they're private ponds. Mm-hmm. So if we're increasing drainage into private ponds, how does that work?
Well, we're not really increasing drainage, so it's really more a matter of how quickly it hits. We're not, the amount of rainfall that hits and the amount of runoff you get isn't going to change by doing these projects. It's just going to give it a place to flow. Right. So if you had a development, that would be different. I mean, if you're adding streets and rooftop and impervious cover, then you're increasing the volume of runoff that you actually have. But in this case, we're not creating more runoff. We're just giving it a place to run. Right.
I think those ponds eventually flow into it flows into the creek. The overflow, it goes into the creek.
Yeah, it'll eventually go into a major drainage.
Walnut Creek, maybe. I can't think of which creek.
I don't know offhand.
We joined the Powhatan County Hazard a couple of years ago. My understanding is that could possibly make some FEMA money available to us for that.
You know what it would be? It would be hazard mitigation.
Yeah.
And so, when did y'all join?
2 years ago, we identified two major areas. One of them was flood drainage, and the other one is fire. We're basically trying to figure out how to get some fire breaks around town.
I'll try to find out when that opens up again, but if you've done that, you should be eligible.
And those would be FEMA funds?
They call it hazard mitigation. It's probably not quite as bad as FEMA. It may come from there, but it's probably not what we've been dealing with.
Who administers it?
What?
Who administers it?
I gotta ask her.
Is that to replace housing in low?
No, this is actually to
this
get
is
water. We
this
basically created a plan how to get water out of town faster. We've started part of that. We went down and cleaned out all the creeks down in Death Valley so it flowed to Powhatan Creek better. But we had to identify problem areas. And one of the problem areas we identified was on fire, was on the south side of town along the Coles property. we don't have a fire break there if we have a strong south wind blowing into town. So those are the two areas that we wanted to work on over the 5-year period, is figure out how to get a fire break there and figure out how to get the flood water out of town. And we knew we had backed up at the creek right before we got down to the creek, so we went in there with a chainsaw
It actually is FEMA, but it's a different program than what you have to do with. It's called hazard mitigation. It allows you to actually do things that instead of just putting them back like that.
This is a little bit off track for what I'm doing, but one thing I would strongly suggest you consider are the development standards that these guys put together, specifically for drainage, although covers a whole slew of things, but being able to control the development in as much as it affects drainage to a great extent would benefit you. Yeah, the subdivision regulations, because and there's utility regulations, there's all kinds of things, but without a subdivision standard, people can come in. He was talking about the detention, which is a common way to mitigate increased runoff. But without a subdivision regulation, if somebody comes into town, especially, and develops without any regulation, they can just put it out on the street like they're doing now, and then they would be increasing your runoff and create serious problems. So it's smaller communities generally don't have subdivision regulations. They're loath to go through that process and adopt them, but it would benefit you greatly, especially when the park comes, and if some of this growth that we think may be coming happens, you need to be in a position to control how that happens. So, any questions about the storm? Yes.
You talk about the drainage problems there, because that's right where I live. They did dig out the one ditch and then replaced the culvert, and it really did help a lot. But they cleaned out the ditch behind, salty ditch, and it's already growing back. And on my west side of my house, and then on the east side of my neighbor's house along that road, the water fills in there, so it needs to be dug out more all the way so it will drain into that ditch. Is that part of the plan?
It's probably in the
Yeah.
portion of it.
Yeah, I think that probably would be in the maintenance portion of it. When you get down to actually designing these things, you identify, tighter areas where things need to be done. But generally, I would say the answer to your question is yes, if that's what needs to be done.
Really heavy rain, it'll sit out there for days.
Right. Now, I'll also say that, the ability of the city to do some of that work depends on whether or not it's in city, if they have access to it. And so they can't go on private property and start making improvements. It has.
Maintenance on salty ditch and stuff. We have some equipment on order that will make that maintenance of that much easier that we haven't been able to do in the past. As soon as we'll be able to
That'd be awesome.
stay on top of it to where it drains better.
So if it's in an existing drainage ordinance, certainly.
Well, especially on the west side of my house and the east side of the neighbor's house, that road right there, the water just spills in those two ditches that are on our properties. Well, really, it's the easement of the city, and it just goes down there and it just sits because it's not dug out to get into the ditch there. So that's what my concern is.
It would definitely help to take video of problem areas, so we can save it and have a list of where we need to work on this stuff. I try to do that, but it doesn't rain that often, so.
Well, what you did made it great, because all the water right there in front of Aaron's house used to run in my yard, but now it goes through it goes down.
Well, that would be, anybody that has a problem with drainage, if they would video it and send it to me, I can save it and we can figure out how to prioritize that. That'd be very helpful.
Certainly, again, that, if the equipment is there and the manpower, city, all these things, not all these things, but specifically the streets and the drainage and what we're talking about right now are absolutely things that can be done, as maintenance items with the city. We're just trying to identify where the biggest need is, and then we provide a cost for what it, on a capital improvement basis, what that would look like. So, and then I just hit on real quickly again, if there's no other questions specifically about storm, is again on the funding, especially on the utility side, there's a lot of options there for funding these projects that might free up, time and money for some of the projects that are less, the streets and the drainage projects that aren't as easy to fund. And so keeping on top of it is important. Now, we generally, every year you guys put in a notice to the Water Development Board that, hey, we want to be considered for your funding coming up. You need to continue that. And when the CDBG projects come out, you need to be, putting your name in the hat for those as well. And so keeping an eye on that and keeping your foot in the door there helps, because if you miss one of those cycles, it can kick you another year before you're able to get funding. So, anything else? Thank you. Mm-hmm.
The old water tower on the north side of town is not in use.
We don't do anything to save it.
Not without writing a check. I mean, there's no grant money out there because we can't put it into the system.
Okay.
So that's, I think we'd all love to keep it. We are, this development going in north of town, we're going to use the property underneath that water tower as a pump station. So we're going to develop under it, but there's no money to actually refurb that tower. And we know the long-term plan, we either got to knock it down or do something with it. So it's probably going to be private money. We'll figure out how to do it.
Sure, it always is.
One other quick thing that I didn't, since you mentioned that, another thing you need to understand and keep in mind is when development comes in, the developers need to be paying for the infrastructure to provide what they need, and that doesn't always happen. I mean, a lot of communities just don't realize that should be the way it happens, and so again, the subdivision regs would help there, but that's something.
Can they do impact fees?
Sure. Yeah.
That's something that y'all may want to think about. You would hire an engineer to do the study on the impact fees, and then you pass some kind of ordinance. Then what would happen is that every new development would be paying a portion of the cost to bring that infrastructure out to that development.
Yeah.
Every gentleman earlier was talking about development agreements. Those are used too, and those are all tools that you guys.
Yeah, I can certainly do that, and it's a good tool, but unless you're going to have a lot of development, a lot of rooftops, the income really isn't going to cover the infrastructure, just like the one north of town. I mean, that's a pretty big ticket project, but they're going to cover that, and so, and they should.
Yeah, he's right that right now, but what would hate to happen is for that to start happening, and then you don't have those in place. Yeah. In other words, I don't think it costs you anything to do that. I mean, other than paying for the study up front. But once the fees are in place, it's not yearly costing you anything.
Well, and the fees can be used to pay for the study.
Yeah, okay. So there you go. It's just something to think about. Another way to get to this stuff.
Okay.
Because we hate to give you all a bunch of projects and then not tell you how to get money to get some of this stuff done. Thanks, Derek. So we appreciate all you guys coming, and hopefully we covered some of the things y'all were interested in. What will happen next, guys, is that we'll need to do a final public hearing on this probably at your March meeting. So I have to put it in the paper at least 12 days before the meeting. And then you'll do the hearing, and then you'll pass a resolution accepting the plan, and then I send it to TDA and wait for the letter. And then in the meantime, we'll put all this stuff together. But I'll keep copies because it'll say that a copy of the plan is available for review. So you guys that are here would know what you're looking at, right?
Is all of this online?
We can get that to you. I'd rather get it to a point where it's finalized before we do that, because what the city's going to get. First of all, there'll be a CD where the whole thing, including the maps, will be in PDF format, and that's something y'all can put on your website, right? And in addition, the city's going to have them on the same disk, all the GIS files. Obviously, if you don't have the system, you won't be able to read them, but you'll have them in your possession. But from now on, anytime something changes, you replace a water line, or a new property comes in and gets annexed or something, then you just let us know. It's all digitized now. So.
It's also on that 1 5-year plan that upgrading of our website. Add to the list.
Yeah, okay, we can do that. Yeah, go ahead.
Is Jacob Martin, your GIS type stuff, we talked about trying to get all our utility maps where we can go in and make changes as we find issues, but y'all talk like y'all may get out of that business?
Well, so what we've been doing is we've been providing all the mapping, but the site is hosted by Esri, a separate company. They are getting out of that business, the business of hosting that for other people. Will is trying to determine, what direction we go with it. I'm not sure if we're going to get out of it completely or just change, but it's kind of up in the air right now. Now, these guys do the same
It's
thing.
kind of the same, but in fact, Will's system, their system is great. They're able to handle the website they developed, they're able to handle more data. That online, the online mapping?
Yeah.
Yeah. Esri was only giving you so much space. But yeah, if they're able to continue that, it's a very good tool because it allows you to click on, change this from a 2 to a 6. We just replaced it.
Right, that's what we.
That's
a
on
lot
map.
of our maps are from the 90s, but we don't.
Well,
really-
not anymore. Now
Yeah, well, we don't know what's there from
Yeah.
100 years ago until we dig it up and find it. And so that ability to change that right in
Yeah.
is super helpful.
That's pretty fluid right now, but I'll check with Will and see what the update is.
It was pretty inexpensive because we've seen them in other communities and it's very
Yeah.
reasonable. There's an upfront cost and then there's a maintenance yearly.
The yearly maintenance is $400.
Be absolutely worth it.
It is worth it if they can.
We had a water guy that was off and on here for 30 years. When he retired, has a lot of knowledge that
Yeah, it's all.
we don't know what's in the
It's all in
ground.
there.
Yeah, it's been great. The ones that have done it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Do we have a recording of what you all have said tonight?
I think, yeah, Julie's.
Video?
MicroplexNews.
It's on the Facebook page for Microplex News.
I could go through the whole thing. I might not remember everything I said, but hopefully you got some of that right.
Appreciate you guys coming out. Anybody else have any other questions or about what's
We
going on?
really appreciate it. This is a good crowd, to be honest with you, and we're really appreciative of you guys coming out. And the plan is for not just council, but it's for the city. And it's, like I said, council members change every couple of years, and so it's good to have the plan in there. And another council can pick up where this council leaves off, those kind of things. That's what it's for. That's what it's for. All right. Thank you guys for putting this together. We really appreciate it.
Aaron Johnson. Here, straight up.